The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with the Tennessee standards. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu.
Okay, I wish instead of coming to 10 TESOL, you were at like an Oprah show or an Ellen show where the presenter would come up and be like, you get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car. That would be fantastic. Unfortunately, that's not the case at this mini conference. You are at the end of a long day, which I know that you all have learned so much. I know I've learned a lot. And now we're starting with the final session before you can go home and go to your families or go get a pedicure or go do something fun. Go out to eat, whatever you like. So my name is Rebecca Welch, and I began by coming to MTSU's mini sessions that happened through the year last year. And at first we started out with a group of only about 20 educators coming and trying to collaborate and brainstorm about best practices in teaching ESLs within our districts. That group eventually grew, and then we started getting more state attention and people who really knew what they were doing. So I felt very inadequate as a presenter whenever we had other people come in who knew a lot more than what I did, were much more qualified. However, I do come to you from jumping in Davidson County in metro schools. So I started out as a teacher. I was on Nolensville Road, and I realized that I had 7 different nationalities in my classroom, and I thought, oh, this is different. And had you told me 10 years ago that I would be going back and pursuing a master's in English language acquisition, I would have thought, no way, you're crazy, I'm not interested in that at all. But they came to me, my principal came to me and they said, wow, there is such a demand for this. Would you have any interest if Metro supplemented your master's work in going back and partnering with Lipscomb University and getting that master's? And I said, sure. And they said, I thought, yeah, free education, I'll take it. So we're preacher, teacher, do the math. And at home. So I decided to go back and enroll, and they said, but this year we're going to get your feet wet and we're going to start by putting you on a waiver. And so you'll have plenty of ESL students that you can kind of practice on this year as you continue to pursue your education. And I thought, not bad. I've worked with a lot of high-risk kids. I really liked behavior problems. I really liked angry little boys who came to school and didn't want to learn. That was kind of my niche at the time, and I enjoyed them because I felt like I could make some breakthroughs there. Well, then here came my first little fella, and we were reading a story about the pond. I mean, you're thinking beginning of school, first grade reader, and the pond. And I said, can you tell me something that lives in the pond? And I had all these pictures up of like ocean life around my walls. That was the border in my classroom. That was a free hand-me-down that was really awesome. And he said, yes. And I said, oh, great. And he goes, Squidward. Squidward. He said, yes, Squidward lives in the pond. And I said, can you come over here and show me what Squidward looked like? And he came over and he pointed to the appropriate picture on the wall. And I thought, okay, this is going to be a long year. And I thought, I need to get good at this, and I need to get good at this quickly. And so that became my mission, was to try to find out as much about English language learners as I possibly could, to glean information from multiple people, as any resource that I could put my hands on. That's what I went toward. And so it became a very entertaining year. It was a learning year. And then the next year, little did I know what the Lord had in plan for me. We had about 9 S teams in my class. I had half ESL, half Gen Ed, and my principal was like, we are changing how classes are divided after this year if you survive. And so I learned a lot that year, and it was great. The good thing about ESL, though, is how new it is in the world of education. research out there, I mean, it goes back a little ways, but you're still within 10 years. So I feel like there are breakthroughs that are happening. There are really breakthroughs that are happening year after year, day after day, and people are just learning more and more about how to work with ESLs. You'll notice that the topic of this session are the can-do statements. And so I think we have to back up before we get to the can-do section of this and have a little conversation about some absolutes or lack thereof in the world of education. Okay, so take about a minute and just think, if there's something in your mind that you feel like is an absolute in education, whether it be rules in a classroom, whether it be something that you just feel very convicted about, just take about 1 minute and we're going to kind of outburst some absolutes in education. 1 minute.
Yeah, nothing. Unless you care about it. Yeah.
Okay, does anyone have one? Some absolutes in education. Just raise your hand and we'll go with a rapid fire.
I said caring because you can't do anything unless the kids, are
That's an absolute. Caring. Excellent.
Good attendance.
Good attendance. Very important. Be there every day, all day.
Respect for the student, their families, and their culture.
Respect. Absolute in education. Does not change.
Believing that every child can learn.
Every child can learn. That is an absolute in education, I would say. Anyone this side? Anyone else? Oh, yes.
Providing full services for our ESL students.
Excellent. Excellent. One more.
Safe environment, which goes with respect.
Safe environment. All of these, I would say, are absolutes in education, and some things do not change. This book dates back to the year 1909 as a copyright date. My grandmother was actually my 3rd grade teacher. She graduated from Vanderbilt Peabody, and when she began her career, a lovely woman by the name of Miss Ruth Hobgood presented my grandmother with this book, and she said, "Sudell, you will have no problems in your classroom if you will abide by the lessons in this book." The #1 discipline problem at that time, can anyone guess?
Chewing gum.
Chewing gum. Chewing gum. That was an absolute in education, is that chewing gum, there will be none of that in our classrooms, or the ultimate discipline will be imparted on that person. But some of those things, when you look at the contents, there are many things that you listed that even back in 1909, and I love the language in this. I mean, when you read it, it's presented so eloquently. It seems like now in this day and age, teachers are like, I really, really don't like it. You know, whereas here they use such eloquent verbiage and very professional. And sometimes I long for those days whenever I went back and reviewed this, of the bar that was set by the educators at that time and for their classrooms. Yet they also understood the fact that kids were busy. Kids needed something to do. Kids needed to learn hands-on. You would think that corporal punishment was just the end-all be-all. It was not. It was regarded as a last chance effort. You know, if you had to use the rod, and that's the way they put it in here, that it should really be thought about, you know, when you were even implementing that. So I find this book to be helpful. One thing, and the segue with that, is an absolute that continues to come up with our English language learners is the idea of grading. Oh, look at the snarls. I mean, if the camera could turn this way, wow, the facial expressions out there. Grading as an absolute. I got my first job again out on Nolensville Road, and I was part of a 9-member teaching team of 1st grade teachers. And I have to tell you up front, I'm more of an elementary level gal. And so those elementary teachers, they said, no, we're going to have these team meetings once a week on Wednesdays, and we'd like for you to bring your ideas, any ideas that you have, but there's one subject that is off limits. And I said, oh, what is that? Grading. We are not talking about grading in here. This meeting, keep grading off the table. And I thought, okay, what's so hard about grading? I mean, the kid can either do it or they can't, you know, and then they're given a grade accordingly. And she said, well, you know, I teach these ESLs because there were 2 of us at the time, and it was before I had started. And she said, my ESLs, you know, they're not going to have the same questions and all as what the gen ed students are, and their grades are not going to align perfectly. And I'm not going to argue with Miss So-and-so about that because she thinks that there should be no difference at all, and it will waste all of our meeting. So come to the meeting, do not bring up grading. And I thought, okay, I can do this. And then I started realizing, wow, you know, there's not much difference in grading as far as the gen ed classroom with our children that are part of special education. There's not alternative grading for our English language learners. And grading is becoming more and more of an issue. And so that started me thinking, there's got to be a place where kids won't get discouraged, but yet they can still meet grade level requirements. Because I've seen it, and many of you probably have too. I've seen the phases of especially newcomers as they come over and they sit down in our classes and they try so hard to learn. I have one little girl, and she's in second grade. I'm teaching second grade now. I got promoted. And I'm starting her out on a very low level book. Well, I mean, it's basically the bus is red, the bus is yellow, the bus is green. Well, our reading coach at the time, she's bilingual. And so she orders a Spanish version of Esperanza Rising. And so she starts pulling her out every day with that book. Well, I mean, after the first day, she came back and she had that book and she marched right up to me. And she knew I loved her. I mean, that was never a question. And she knew I wanted the best for her. And she pointed to that book and she was like, I mean, like, let me tell you, sister, it's a new day in here. I'm tired of reading this bus is yellow, the bus is red, the bus is green. I am reading this. And so let that be known. And I thought, okay, I have this student who can comprehend this book just fine. And yet, in my English-speaking classroom, my grading scale for her is going to be very different. And so now I'm going to watch this child go through the process of being extremely discouraged. Then she's going to get just mad. And after that, so many times just that depression kicks in. Raise your hand if you've seen those depressed kids. They're the saddest in my book, the hardest to watch. So I thought, we've got to do something. We've got to talk to general ed teachers and give them some conviction on what these students can do, what they can do. And then you start getting some pushback and saying, our district doesn't allow it. And what do you mean I'm only going to grade them on 10 things, and those 10 things are going to be so simple? Again, that doesn't align with Susie over here, who can just knock it out of the park with all that she knows. So that led me to making some phone calls. And my phone call ends up with the famous Jan Lanier. I love Jan. She's got a heart for kids like no other, and she will work and work and work to be sure that those kids have great success. And I said, Jan, what's the deal with grades? Who makes that final decision? Who determines what grades kids can have and how the teachers can grade? Who is in charge of making that decision? And does anyone know who is the bottom line for grades?
Superintendent.
You were in my session a few months ago, yes. The answer is the superintendent. That is the ultimate person making a decision on how grades are given within your district. So one thing that you found whenever you were registering for these classes is that everyone needed some type of device. And I believe in teaching adults like adults. And sometimes I know how busy we get with all the to-do list of going back to school that sometimes we just don't have a little bit of time to commit to a little bit of research and a little bit of time to study. So right quickly, I want you just to have a little fun with your Google search and just Google ESL's grading and see what you come up with. Okay, so we'll take about 5 minutes just to Google ESL's and grading and see what you come up with. Having any luck?
Mentioned not having it.
What now?
Everything I've looked up is basing it on can do descriptors.
Okay, good.
I found different stuff.
Okay.
The 5 pillars. And then there's
Yeah, that's the
like
one
I
we're
looked
looking
some
at.
different schools, and Baltimore, for example, has all of
For international school, let's see what it says.
it's what you must do and you can't
Yes.
do. Like
Yes.
you cannot penalize them for
Yes.
time that they missed. And
Yes, so Googling Baltimore, Maryland, that's a good one. That state tends to have it coming together a bit better.
I'm not sure where this came from, but this one says for level 1 ESLs, they are considered no grade. They come in at the beginning of the semester with no grade written at the top of the list. And then level 2 and 3 are considered sympathetic grading.
Yes, excellent. Type in your search, go to grading ESLs and type in New Jersey. This is one that I've found to be pretty impressive. And it also bases things off of the can-do descriptors. And it uses your WIDA proficiency levels. So in the beginning, it's looking at a pass-fail, and then gradually the student continues to progress. When I found that one, I had a bit more of an aha moment, because at the time I was watching a 3rd grade teacher and a newcomer student, both very frustrated in their own right. The 3rd grade teacher had 20 kids that, spoke pretty proficient English, moving right along, and then he has the student to come in who knows absolutely no English. However, the kid is pretty bright. And so that student is working so hard to keep up in math, science, social studies, reading, and the student is getting more and more discouraged. And when you think about it, we've got some purposes in grading. Grading, for one, is a communicator. It's indicating to our fellow teachers, it's indicating to our parents, it's indicating to our district leaders how our students are progressing. But what is the grade indicating to that student who puts so much in it? That's the thing that we have to really think about, and I think we have to advocate even more for our students, is making these lessons and making the things that they can take away from it truly manageable without discouraging them day after day for the bigger picture. I went to a wedding. A friend of mine got married, and he married a girl who was Egyptian. And he's a cardiologist, and she's a doctor. He's finishing up his cardiology degree. And so there were 3 rounds of toasts given at the wedding ceremony, and 3 different nationalities represented. And I heard some of the most beautiful, heartfelt, and funniest toasts given by one that was studying neuroscience, another one that was working on cancers of the blood, and another toast was given by someone who had already completed his MBA and was going on to even more global business endeavors. Very few of their subjects and verbs agreed during those toasts. The main takeaway was, Blake, if you ever hurt her, I am from Colombia and I will track you down. I understood that perfectly. We all did. But the aha moment there was, sometimes we get so caught up on these little things that we forget how much of the content kids can actually learn, they can be graded on, starting out with a pass-fail type system and then moving on to a 10-point scale, something like that, that can make it more manageable for students. I'm really speaking to our elementary and middle school teachers here. Are there any high school teachers in here? Any secondary? That's where it gets a little harder. And I was asked that question the first time I did this presentation, is what do you do about credits? And that's a different ballgame, and I'm not learned enough to have that all figured out yet, but I'm still working on it some. But as far as the elementary and middle school level, the goal is for our kids to continue to want to learn. When you take that away from them, it's ugly. It's depressing on numerous ends. And so that's what we have to advocate for, especially with our gen ed teachers, is what can you do to simplify this content? How can you use our I can statements to also turn that into a grade that will be beneficial to all of our learners? What can they take away from each of your lessons? Also, how much time do they need as an exposure for those lessons? Another thing I spoke with Jan about is I said, you know, what do we do about these kids that are all of a sudden they're just getting 70s, you know, straight down 70s? And we've got a kid who's just really working hard, and that kid knows the difference between a 70 and a 95. They figured that out. And that kid wants that 95 so bad. What do we do, Jan? And she said, well, she said, you can go back to two statements. One is that what you're presenting, the education that you're presenting to that child must be accessible. So you must bring it down to where they can understand it. And the second part of that is that you must have the end in mind, and you must have that education plan already put into effect for that child before you start handing out 70s. And that was really important because I had not always been that teacher. Those of you who are newbies out there, you're in my prayers because it's a lot to figure out that first year, and then you throw some grading scenarios in with your English language learners, especially your newcomers. It's definitely a challenge. But remember that, because should that child's parent or should that child's ESL teacher advocate for that kid to the gen ed classroom teacher, there's got to be a plan. Get the gen ed teacher in on the plan early on. Let that if you're having a pull-out ESL teacher come in, let that person also help and work together so that that child can feel as much success as he or she possibly can. Does that make sense? Any questions on that?
Well, I do have one. Did you go to your superintendent and propose?
Making a proposal. It's still in progress. Hopefully, I would like to think that could happen because I've gone from a district of 73 elementaries in Metro, and people can talk about problems in Metro. Metro is ahead of the game in a lot of areas. They train their teachers well. They train their ESL teachers well. I think that's why you don't see as many of them here, is because they service so many of them in-house. And now I'm in a district of 3 schools, 2 elementaries and a middle. And sometimes you think things like this could happen faster. And actually, it's almost scarier to them because it's such a change. They've never heard of doing it this way before. And so, on the table, but not necessarily approved yet. And also, in a smaller district, well, even in a larger district, you've got to get some more buy-in from those gen ed teachers. And so, again, it was a strange concept last year, end of the year, whenever I started talking about it more and showing them New Jersey, and then also take some time to Google Tennessee and grading ESLs. Not now, we don't have that time, but we're not there yet. We're not there.
My second question, did you see any other districts maybe in Tennessee that had already started?
Not yet, not yet. So I'm trying to be a bit more of a catalyst for it, and especially once we, look at WIDA. And then I guess even personally, I'm trying to prove myself more. But this year we had all of our 5th graders, and that's the group I work with, are 4th and 5th right now, and all but 2 exited. And so I'm trying to also make a point based on qualifications and work ethic, even personally, like listen to what I'm trying to tell you, that kind of thing. So if you do continue to progress in your districts, please share that with the rest of us, because I think it's a practice that could be very beneficial, especially for those first year kiddos. I think it would relieve so much stress from teacher as well as student. Is anyone not familiar with the can-dos? Okay. So you will look that up, right? We're on the countdown before summer break is over, and it's done very well. It is in pretty self-explanatory language. I went to the WIDA training, and they knocked it out of the park as far as I was concerned on talking about the can-dos. Raise your hand if you went to that. I would highly recommend that. That's fantastic. But in the meantime, let's switch over, if we can, man upstairs, to the document camera. And this is what I'd like for you all to do. We'll start with mine. And we were a TAP district for a while. It's very similar to TEAM, but our lesson plans follow a TAP format. We're switching back to TEAM this year. It was part of a big grant, and so that's why they went to that. But I wanted us to take just a minute, and if you all will pull up your can-do statements, and if you're on that New Jersey site, you can go back and get the can-dos up. This is a first grade lesson plan. I started to bring second. Based off of narrative writing. I tried to pick a familiar text everybody's familiar with. If you give a mouse a cookie, right? Kids love it. They come back for it. They're ready to see the moose. They're ready to see the cat. Whatever that you've got that you're giving them food, they're all in, or a movie. And so what we did is we looked at our social studies standards on the state of Tennessee, and I tried to use that as a culminating activity where they would eventually write their own book based on that, on if you take a mouse to Tennessee, or whatever animal they chose at that point. And so I wanted you to kind of look through this. We've got our vocabulary as urban and rural. They're going to learn parts of Tennessee and discuss those, and then pull their book together. So as you're looking at the I can statements for first grade, your can-do descriptors, and we could do this at the last section, you remember. Take a minute and look at those and see, where do you see that they would fall in to a lesson plan like this? And where would they need to be?
Objectives.
Good answer. Good answer. And that's something that I think there needs to be more clarification on, and I think that our administrators need to be trained on where to look for those. That's something that we desperately need to go into effect. So if you're entering your first grade and you are a level 1 and looking on your listening part, do you think that these students, if they're coming in, could understand, but using pictures, urban and rural, just our vocabulary? I do. Okay. There's two things. If you're going on a 10-point scale, that student right now, if they can get that, that's 20 points at the end of your lesson. Does that make sense on grading? Because that's what we worry about as teachers. It's the grading aspect. Okay, if you look down to speaking, what do you see from that standpoint? Could they tell you the capital of Tennessee? If you've taught that? Can they tell you Nashville? Okay, now we're up to 30 points. Okay, this is a student that is just entering, that knows very little language, but knows enough. Okay, great. So we've given the high five because they've gotten the urban. We've given them the high five because they've gotten the rural. And now they're getting a high 10 because they've got the capital of Tennessee, which is Nashville. How do you think that kid's feeling right now? Think they're feeling like they can do it? I think they are. Okay, keep going. And I always know it's hard when it's somebody else's lesson plan. And even think about what else you know about the state of Tennessee. Do we have some major rivers in Tennessee? Yes. Do you feel like these students, after you teach this, do you think that they could take their mouse to each one of these rivers? Probably so. What about other major cities in the state of Tennessee? What about dividing it into the 3 grand divisions of Tennessee? Probably so. Tourist attractions, if you've done a little virtual tour of Nashville and learning that Nashville is known for country music. Do you see how many parts? Are we up to 10 points? Or 10 10-point questions? Yes. So at the end, as far as the student being able to at least get this much by pointing and oral information, pretty good. After that, when they start trying to construct those sentences and you're modeling it for them and then they're trying to move it into book form, do you feel like we're making progress? I feel like we're making a lot of progress. And it's also very heavy in content. And this is just one lesson. So when you're looking at those I can statements and you're also thinking about grading practices, thinking about what you can do to continue to make that education accessible to the students. Okay? So here's where we take a little bit of about a 15-minute work session. And so what I would like to ask for you to do is on your device, if you're like me, I've got lesson plans, coming up that I've used in the past, take an old lesson plan, look at that, look at your can-dos, and just kind of jot beside it. If you can find, 1 or 2 that you can quickly implement, do that. If not, look at your science standards, look at your social studies, old or new, and start thinking about what you can do to implement your can-dos into the upcoming year's standards. Okay? So take about 15 minutes. After that, I'm going to ask some people to share out. When I did this session earlier in the year, the high school teacher, definitely the greatest difficulty. Our elementary teachers could do this pretty well. They could find a couple of ways. They could get a couple of them in just to get their feet wet. And if you need any help along the way, raise your hand and I'll try to do my best. Okay. So 3:15, we'll come back.
Or we're going to even upgrade it to adaptations.
And that can make or break you.
I hate it. And so what?
When there was just speech writing of that.
No.
Basically, you've done terrible.
I think most systems, there's just no policy in place. It's this.
That every grade level talks about, from first grade up, what characteristics do animals have that help them survive.
And they should learn about and use words from literature selection, isolate and pronounce the first sounds and words that begin with the letter I, and learn that.
The student will know how to analyze characters.
Listening and speaking, and then
Can do with pictures.
Okay.
like environmental. I get it. I guess. I got that. I know that one. I know that one. So it's what do you inherit versus what
Again, I know you're middle school, but second grade history, you're going to do culture is going to be the first 9 weeks, and then you're going to do westward expansion, and then you're going to do, the state. And okay, a lot of good stuff. I didn't float as much as what I thought I might, but it sounded like good conversations were coming from multiple places. And I personally prefer workshops like this because I'm a talker, and I think that ideas lead to other ideas, and if we can't figure it out initially, then maybe with more and more conversation, we'll get to a consensus, or we'll get to a general idea. Another thing presented beyond just the lesson is with the pull-out teacher. Sometimes if you like PBL, those can-dos will fit very well within a PBL approach. If you've got the cell as a major science topic in your 4th grade.
What is PBL?
Project-based learning. Yeah. So if they're going to build it, explain it, the plant, something of that nature, that's another place for your can-dos to come through, another way for your 10 points here, 10 points here, building up to that That grade level of 100? Good conversation over here with the middle school teacher, just talking about how much comes out of that middle school lesson. There's so much vocabulary, there's just so many words. If you've ever sat and observed a middle school lecture, which is what a lot of them turn into, sadly, it's a lot of English coming at that kid really fast. So we've got a first-year math teacher coming up back there in the wonderful metropolis of Smyrna. You know, if possible, if you can just add to that vocabulary, you know, and then you're eventually giving that child that vocabulary 10-point assessment. And here's the rest of the takeaway on that. How many of you know some other gen ed kids that could also really benefit from that 10-point assessment to make them feel a little bit better than constantly getting a did not pass, try harder, take it again next week, the grade for learning, whatever philosophy you're coming from as far as your district's concerned. That does bring me to another point with ESLs. Let's say that you've got that kid that is struggling with those content vocabulary, those 10 points. Give it to them again. Give them the same thing again. Because what's the goal at the end of that grade is that they know it, right? You're not proving anything to anybody as an educator except for the fact that that kid came out of your class wanting to learn and learn more and more and more. Another kind of aha moment that I had my third year of teaching is I only have these kids for a year. If I'm the gen ed teacher, I only have them for a year. That can be overwhelming, but yet at the same time, it also puts things into the big picture. Whereas if I have spent that year really discouraging a kid from wanting to learn anything, wow, what a year. But if I have that kid, and even though they didn't learn a whole lot, they didn't learn just as much as probably their gen ed counterparts, if they are coming out of there wanting to learn, that's going to mean more to the teacher than when that teacher looks back and says, wait a minute, this kid can't do anything, and you've given them all 90s. What's with that? You may have to have a conversation about your grading of that particular ESL student. Have a professional conversation. Allow that teacher some time to grow who maybe did not come to an ESL workshop over the summer. So have a good professional conversation with that person as well. Okay, some ideas. We've got about 5 minutes. If you've got a lesson plan where you could find a couple of can-dos, if you can tell me your general lesson objective or topic, and then a couple can-dos that you could put in there. Anybody got anything? Go for it.
Yeah, we do. We use grade cluster 2 and 3, newcomer or beginner level 1 and 2, explain how animal characteristics or adaptations help them survive. And the reading writing would be from a word wall, choose and match pictures and words, and also label a diagram. Listening, they would listen to a description and point to the correct physical characteristic. Speaking, name the characteristic or answer a simple question, but it might also include acting out to show that they understood. And you could advance it by asking, how does it help?
Fantastic. So if you are the middle school content teacher over here, if they at least know that much, are you feeling a little bit better? We're all feeling better. If they come resistant to that and they haven't gotten it and they've already tuned that teacher out because this is second 9 weeks of that school year, not so good. Not so good. Anybody have another one? Lesson plans where they can, yes?
High school.
High school, oh, wow.
However, like one of the writing can-dos, organizing information according to content-specific expectations. And so, you know, you think about science and lab reports, you know, biology or chemistry lab reports, physics, also with social studies.
That's great. That's great. So she's bringing in her can-dos to those lab reports. That will help a kid's grade considerably. They may not can give you an entire dissertation to it, but they can start somewhere, and that's huge. I think that's definitely the intent of can-dos. Anyone else? Go for it.
We were looking at the standard for 5th grade about distinguishing among inherited and or environmental factors. And we said for a level 1 5th grader, they could utilize pictures to sort and discuss factors and group them accordingly.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good. That's going to work. It's going to work. And I know it's hard when you're getting up there into that 4th and 5th because you have kids for such a limited time, if you're doing rotations and all, to keep getting that small group. But so many times my small group would be these 2 kids over here to the right. Even when I'm whole grouping it out, if you're doing a 10-minute conversation, 10-minute of work, I do, we do, you do, something, I mean, my first person is right here, and I get that going. Okay, so some of that, even take a minute and review your systems going in your classroom. Okay, so that's all that I have for today, or this is a good place to stop with it. There will be more and more to come out with can-dos. The only other encouragement that I want to give you is when a teacher says, I don't get it, and you have a coach, you have somebody in that classroom that can let you work with that teacher, or that can let that teacher come in and watch you, don't say no to that. I said no to that for a really long time because it made me so nervous. And then I became a lab classroom in Metro where my room was a revolving door. People came in, they came out. You know, it's with ESLs, they're coming in and out anyway. And so they were either big people or little people. It didn't matter. Don't put so much pressure on yourselves to have these perfect, flawless lessons. Because at the end of the day, what you're modeling more than anything else is that the needs of those kids who need things presented maybe a little differently or a little more time or a different level of grading, model that. Don't miss an opportunity so people can see, hey, this can be done. I've seen it. That goes much farther than Rebecca Welch standing up here telling you how to do it. Okay, showing goes way further with that. Thanks again for your time. Again, I don't have cards to give away or anything like that, but I'll give you a hug. Okay?
Could you give us your email and would you be willing to?
Oh, sure. Sure. Yes, sure. My email is rwelch, kind of like the grape juice, WELCH, at K12MCS.net. And I'll tell you, I've had people ask before if I'd talked to their district with some of the ESL training, and I will tell you my strength is not necessarily in sharing policy. My strength is trying to get your gen ed teachers on board with effective strategies for teaching those kids day in and day out. So I'll go on and give you that heads up on where I feel like my strength lies in that too, because that to me is what's really important at the end of the day. Okay, thanks a lot for your time. Appreciate you.